What's up, guys? Today I have 3 viewer submitted teams that I'm going to analyze, rate out of 10, fix, and then rate them out of 10 again. But before we get into it, let's go over some rules. First up, I will be rating teams based solely on top level competitive viability, not how fun or cool the team is. Next, I'm going to be rating each team on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 to 2 being near guaranteed loss at a top level, 2 to 4 a likely loss at a top level, 5 to 6 decent but needs some work, 7 to 8 strong but still has a few flaws, and 9 to 10 very strong with almost no flaws. And lastly, rule number 3, I will not change the key Pokemon or goal of the team when fixing it, even if that key Pokemon may be unviable. Starting off here, we have a Greninja offense by Solo Beans. So let's take a look at this. First off, we've got this timid LO Terra Water Hydro Pump Greninja. Pretty standard set here, nothing too crazy. Zamazenta standard ID Roar set with Terra Fire. A pretty normal lead Lando. A Darkrai with one little interesting tech here of Psyshock, so that can blow up Clodsire, Okidogi, and Blissey. CB Rillaboom, and a nice standard AV Crown. So there are a few changes I want to make here, but before we get into that, I'll kind of explain what this team does well and what it does poorly. So what I really do like is good, solid offensive power. This team covers its bases defensively reasonably well while having a lot of strong Pokemon. Really everything on this team can pack a punch, nothing is passive, and we have a lot of power, so that's good. We'll say Darkrai and Rilla are great for early game breaking, and then we have really nice end gamers such as Greninja and Zama, so that's good too. Now, and the other thing I'd say is the stall matchup is surprisingly good. I thought it'd be terrible, but this Darkrai can really mess up some stall teams. Now onto the bad side of things. So the first thing is Iron Moth is really rough. If you look at this team, we have kind of one answer for Iron Moth, and that's Zamazenta clicking Roar, and then it can be handled by Greninja and Darkrai. It also cannot kill Iron Crown right away, but Iron Crown doesn't really have any great moves to hit it other than Future Sight, which is, not great against substitute Iron Moth. So overall, the Iron Moth matchup is pretty rough, and if the Zama's chipped, it's kind of just over. Landorus can work as well, but being the rock setter and defensive pivot of the team, Landorus avoiding chip on it is close to impossible. Now, other thing is Gliscor is a little bit rough. Not a huge issue since the team is fairly offensive and can kind of overwhelm Gliscor with stuff like CB Rilla setup. But I will say the lack of a really solid switch in is kind of difficult. Greninja does not like switching in, and with its Life Orb is not going to be around for very long. And it struggles also a fair bit with Ting Lu. Like, this can't really touch Ting Lu. This doesn't really love Ting Lu, and it can also Terra. And Darkrai in particular really cannot touch Ting Lu. You have to Sludge Bomb and hope for a poison, but it's not doing very much at all. But the biggest issue I had when I tested this on ladder was webs. So much of this team relies on webs. These 3, honestly these 4, become non-Pokemon with webs up. If you face a webs team, it is over at preview. It is absolutely over, and there's nothing you can do about it. So I would say my rating of this team would be a 7 out of 10 before. It has some rough matchups, but it tested pretty well on ladder, and honestly was overall a pretty strong team that got a lot done and was just powerful and overwhelmed the opponent's team faster than it got overwhelmed most of the time, but it did have some really rough matchups. So let's fix this. So one quick change, and actually one really big change, is removing Psyshock for Wisp. So this does a lot of things. First of all, this Darkrai set initially could not touch Kingambit. Now it can. Now it can Wisp it. It can also Wisp Ting Lu, which is really nice. But also this set is even better against Stall. Psyshock is not going to get past Terra Dark Blissey or Terra Steel Clodsire. Wisp is going to get past Terra Steel Clodsire. So this Darkrai set in grassy terrain is Stall's absolute worst nightmare. So it is a really good thing to run. Now, next thing I want to do is actually adjust this Iron Crown. So the Iron Moth matchup is extremely difficult. So what I want to go with is a bulkier set on this crown. So we're going to go 216 HP. We can lower this speed quite a bit. We really just need to hit 240, and that'll give us enough that we can add in a little bit more special attack. So we're basically going to go with a much fatter crown here. And instead of Future Sight, I'm going to run Psy Shock and Psychic Noise. This is going to allow you to take a +2 Fiery Dance from an Iron Moth and kill it with either a Psy Shock or a Psychic Noise based on it having a substitute up or not. And I decided to go with Terra Water now that we got rid of Focus Blast, just so even a chipped Iron Crown can handle that Moth, because Moth was really, really a huge issue. Now, those were the main changes. Really wasn't anything else. You could play around with the Terra types a bit. I personally think Ghost is a little better on Landorus. Allows you to deny Tusk Rapid Spin, since bulk up Tusk can be an issue for this team late game. But for the most part, team was pretty solid other than that. You know, you could run Surf on Greninja. You could run Terra Ghost, since Dragonite can be a little bit scary. But overall, team functioned pretty well. I would say rating after the fixes would be a 7.5. I didn't really change much about the team, but I did fix a couple of things that it was struggling with and boost a few matchups. The main change was this Wisp, which is going to give you a way more consistent matchup against bulkier teams and stall teams. There was one other thing I tested though. Now I know I say one of the rules is I don't change the feature Pokemon. So this will be the team, as you see it here, that I'll put in the description. But I tried a Quaquaval version of this team, and it was actually quite good. So I put on Quaquaval Aqua Step with an Assault Vest set, and you'll see why. Rapid Spin and Close Combat, giving this team removal, and we're also going to put Terra Electric. This allows you to lead on Rabombi on Webs teams, Terra Electric immediately, and just get going. And of course, when you're facing a Webs build, a Araquanid Webs build, this will be able to handle that well just by leading and clicking Aqua Step on the Araquanid. So this set, not only does this give you a really nice Iron Moth matchup, so you can actually switch your Iron Crown if you want back to a different set, and I even tried Choice Specs out, but you are really able to remove and put pressure on those Hazard Stack teams, and in particular, this takes your Webs matchup from instant loss to pretty good, because especially when you lead right off the bat, with this Terra Electric Quaquaval, the Rabombi is going to click Stun Spore almost every time, and it's also not bad into Webs teams. I mean, you still have the Steel Resist for Goldengo, which is good, and also it allows you to resist Raging Bolt Thunderclap, so you can get off a really powerful CC before going down. Now this team, the Quaquaval version, I had a lot of success with. I would probably give this an 8 out of 10. Or 8.5, 8.5 out of 10. I was really impressed with its performance, and it also is really good against Hisui and Samurott. Greninja in general was just inconsistent, kind of weak, didn't really impress me very much, and I found Quaquaval better and more threatening overall. Before we continue, I have an issue to bring to your attention. Bug types have declared war on Wo-Chien, stating that its continued existence is an affront to bug types everywhere. Wo-Chien is doing its best, it's got a substitute up, it's clicking Protect, it's trying to set some Leech Seeds, but it's getting U-turned and U-turned on, and it won't last long unless we can send aid. So if you love Wo-Chien as much as I do, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment so I can afford to send some Steel types to join Wo-Chien in its struggle. Thank you. Next up, we have a Sylveon Balance by Carlos. So taking a look at this, here's the star of the team here, a Terra Poison Sylveon, Wish, Tect, Calm Mind, Hyper Voice, a fairly standard but threatening set, at least standard on when you do see Sylveon, although it is certainly rare to see Sylveon. So we've got a very interesting set here, an Air Balloon Iron Treads, a Booster Speed Iron Moth, nothing too crazy there, just Terra Grass. Slowking Kanto, which you don't see too often, running kind of a mixed defense set here, with Ice Beam as the choice of coverage, one of the very few Pokemon that still gets Scald. Banded Terra Dark Meowscarada with Sucker Punch, and we've got just a defensive Helmet Chomp here. So this team, I honestly picked it because I thought it would be my bad team for the video. I usually like to pick one team that's weaker than the others, and I looked at this and I said, wow, this team doesn't make sense. This looks kind of trash. Anyway, though, but before I start making changes, I always play the team and see how it performs. And this team, as you see it, got me to rank 3. So I definitely underestimated it a little bit. Now, that being said, I think it was somewhat of a fluke. I'd say probably the team would not be able to do that again, as I was already fairly high elo when I started testing it, but it still performed a lot better than I thought. And it does have a lot of good things. Balloon Treads, I was shocked by. So this team does not have a ground immunity, so Treads is really nice for that. And it's fantastic for webs and hazard stack as well, because it gets that immunity to spikes and webs. So that's really, really nice tech. Slowking Regular as well, also really nice here, especially given the team's ground weakness. We don't want to stack that by adding a Glow King. So that was very nice. And the other thing I'd say is Sylveon works surprisingly well on this team. I was impressed when I used it that its Hyper Voice was actually just a generally strong move. It could come in on all this stuff, a lot of things, just live a hit and start firing off powerful Hyper Voices. And of course, its Hyper Voice bypassing sub makes it a really nice answer to a lot of Curem sets, which is really great as well. The other thing I was surprised by was how often it swept. This Sylveon actually could get off Calm Mind sweeps, and it put a lot of pressure on the opponent to make sure they preserved certain Pokemon, or Calm Mind Sylveon would just run them over in the end game. Now, it was not all good. There were some bad things. So the first thing that was really, really rough was the weakness to Kingambit. There really isn't a Kingambit answer here. This dies very easily with a few Supreme Overlord boosts. Sylveon is obviously getting farmed. Glow King's getting farmed. This is setup fodder. This is easily chipped, has no recovery, and dies to a Sucker Punch with fairly minimal chip. So basically, every time you see a Kingambit, you're playing substitute games with Iron Moth. You have to let it kill Garchomp and get its chip, play sub games with Iron Moth, and if it Terras, you can maybe Sucker Punch it down with Meowscarada. But there really isn't a Kingambit answer, especially in the game. It's devastating. Next thing is Iron Moth just being inconsistent. As speed control, as a sweeper, it is very hit or miss. So it's in the middle of this balance team, and it sometimes does great and it sometimes does nothing. But you definitely don't really want that level of inconsistency when you're using a Pokemon like this on a balanced team. So just to have an Iron Moth here in the middle of the team, it was exactly as inconsistent as I thought it would be, unfortunately. The other thing is no really reliable speed. I mean, as this Iron Moth is the only fast thing, but it only gets that booster energy once. Meowscarada is fast, but it's not outspeeding a lot of threats. Like, it's not outspeeding Zamazenta, it's not outspeeding Darkrai, so not really the best form of speed control there. In particular, that became an issue with Darkrai. And the last thing was the stall matchup is devastating. This team has no real way of breaking stall. I mean, you've got a Garchomp that is, you know, it can set up rocks, and you can maybe manage to get it off on the Corviknight, but probably the Corv is just going to defog this every time. And with Iron Moth doing absolutely nothing, you're basically playing a 5 Pokemon game against Stall, which is really rough. And of course, Sylveon's not doing anything. Your only real tool against Stall is FS plus Meowscarada, which is not bad, but it's not going to get the job done without hazards. And you can't really set hazards on a Stall team, given how Corviknight will be able to PP Stall and just defog. So before the fixes, I would give this team a 7 out of 10. Now let's make some adjustments. So the first thing I want to do, and the biggest thing, is getting rid of this Iron Moth. This was always the weakest link on the team, and we're going to replace it with a Scarf Darkrai. And I consider the best set for this to be this right here. Terra Ghost with Wisp, Dark Pulse, Trick, and Ice Beam. So this does a few things. One, it gives us a second, more reliable answer to Kingambit, since we can Trick it, one, but also we can Wisp it, both of which are really solid options to deal with Kingambit. Also, resisting Dark is nice. Now, the other thing is, this Darkrai can Trick against a Stall team, so we can kind of trade one for one there, get something on the Stall team out of commission, and Stall doesn't honestly really like taking Will-O-Wisps either. So if you can get the Blissey Will-O-Wisp, get the Blissey tricked, you can Wisp some things, start going for Dark Pulse flinches, and it's really not bad. So that helps with the Stall matchup a lot. I'm not going to touch the Balloon Treads. I thought this set might be bad, but it was actually really, really impressive and worked well. Now, the next thing I wanted to change was the Garchomp. So I think This particular spread has a bit too much speed. I don't think this Garchomp needs to be that fast. I do think it's important for Garchomp to outspeed Bolt, so hitting 250 is good, but we can put that in Impish. It really wants the defense more than it wants to be a little bit faster. So that's going to make this a more reliable wall. And the other thing I wanted to do was get rid of Stone Edge in favor of Spike. So this is actually a big change for a few reasons. Stone Edge was added to this team, I expect, because of the Moltres weakness, and it's true. Moltres is not a fun time for this team, but we're going to do something about that in a second. The reason we need Spikes, first of all, it's just very good. Spikes are a good move to have. Garchomp gets it. It's nice to slap on. But the other thing is, now Corviknight can no longer PP stall, because you can rotate between clicking Stealth Rock and Spikes, and even with pressure stalling, the Corviknight will have to let hazards get up, which is really, really big for Meowscarada in the stall matchup. Also, to keep those hazards up against other teams, I wanted to go Terra Ghost. That will allow Garchomp to block Rapid Spin, which is the main form of removal these days. Now on this Meowscarada, I found Terra Dark a little bit overkill. I didn't really need the power. What I would really like is to be able to not risk Flame Body on Moltres. That will make this team a lot more flexible and improve the Moltres matchup, so we no longer have to rely on our opponent getting Stone Edged. The one last thing I wanted to change was Terra types. So I wanted to go Terra Poison on this to give us a solid T-Spike absorber for the stall matchup in particular, but it can be helpful in other cases. Removing Iron Moth for Darkrai was in many ways a really strong fix, but it did open the team up to T-Spikes a little bit more, so this kind of patches that weakness up. And on Sylveon, I wanted to go Terra Steel. That's mainly because this team really struggles against Specs Kyurem, and without Terra Steel on Sylveon, it basically just runs through the team with Specs Freeze Dry. Now, this team actually, after these changes, got me to rank 1 in OU, and you can watch that run live on my channel. But I would say after these changes, this team is a 9.5 out of 10. Really, really strong team, and really good stuff from Carlos. Last up, we have a CB Val and Specs Torn Balance by Preposterous T. So let's take a look at these sets. First up, we just got a Tornadus. Fairly standard for a spec set here. Normal at EVs are about what you'd think. A Clodsire, nothing crazy. Water Absorb set. Something that I think is worth noting is that this Clodsire does not have any hazards, so it's a bit of a more passive set, but definitely Poison Jab does have its advantages. Garganacl, pretty standard Terra Water set here. Rocks Cure, and Great Tusk. Only real unique thing here being Stone Edge, which is nice for catching the birds. A standard Boots Wisp Pult, and a little bit of unique set here with a Choice Band Iron Valiant. So what I do like about this team is that it has pretty solid breaking power against non-stall teams. I don't see this getting past the stall, but you do have a lot of Pokemon. Not a lot of Pokemon are passive on this team. A lot of them can really pack a punch, which is good. And I'll say the speed control is quite solid. This is a very fast team for a balanced build. You've got 3 Pokemon that are really, really speedy, which is nice. Now, on the bad side, there are a lot of things that I'm not a fan of. So one is this team is shockingly weak to Clefable. Like, I faced a Clefable and it was just over. I felt like I felt completely helpless. I couldn't even break it. I couldn't even try to break it. Clodsire could come in and click Poison Jab for 30. That's about all you could do. So like Clefable is just a devastating matchup. Torn in general, I kind of hated, to be honest. I hated using it. I'm here with this Pokemon with 110 special attack using a 100 base power move, which is fine, but nothing crazy. And it's 80 accuracy, like 80. That's Hydro Pump. This thing is just not accurate at all. To hit even any attack, you have to risk a 90 accuracy at most. But most of the time you're clicking Bleak Wind, which is not that strong of a move. So like the payoff of hitting it versus having an 80 accuracy move that you can't really rely on hitting, it's just not strong. It's not particularly good. So I did not like using Tornadus in general. I found it very inconsistent. Now next up, this team is super weak to King Gambit. And the reason is it has no Steel Resist. which makes it also super weak to Goldengo and Scizor and basically every steel type with any strong steel stab. If you look at this team, I mean, there's nothing. You have to Terra Garg, which can get you past the Goldengo issue, but it's not going to get you past the Kingambit issue. So the lack of a steel resist is a huge issue here. Also really struggles against Meowscarada. If you look at this team, just everything is kind of getting farmed by Meowscarada. You can't really switch into it. And Kyurem as well was a huge struggle. There's really nothing on this team. Even if you just imagine like a sub-tacked Earth Power Freeze Dry set, it's absolutely devastating against this team. Now, the way I wanted to fix this, there were a couple things. So first, I wanted to replace Clodsire with Slowking. It's going to make the team a lot less passive, boost that Clefable matchup, give you something that can hit a little bit harder, improves the Kyurem matchup a lot for sure. On this, you could go a few Terra types, you could go Fairy, you could go Water. I was inclined to run Water, just given the matchup you currently have against Steel types. And this also gives Future Sight support for Ival, which is really nice. So Future Sight, Sludge, I wanted to go Psyshock on this because the Iron Moth situation is actually really scary as well. Forgot to mention that one, but Iron Moth is very difficult. All it takes is like a subset with Terra Grass, and you're kind of smoked because this Garg is the only real answer other than kind of Pult, but I think Psyshock is worth running. The other option you could do is Psychic Noise, and that would actually help with sub Kyurem as well, because you could attack it from behind a sub. But if you were to go with that, I would recommend a Terra Fairy set, which would be a little bit better against that Kyurem. Nothing crazy about this. You can run, there's like a 16 spread as well. Not a big deal, really. This one can live a hit from Meowscarada, which, given this team's Meowscarada weakness, it might end up being important. And the next thing I wanted to do, now I know I did not fix the Steel matchup. For that, unfortunately, you're really just going to have to rely on Garg clicking Terra, but there was something I can do to help the Kingambit matchup. I don't think, as I said, I think this team's power level is fine, especially now that it has Future Sight to buff it against the Stall matchup. What you really need is more defense. So I wanted to put this Tusk, change it up a little bit, give it a lot more HP, and go Rocky Helmet, so Kingambit will at least be punished for clicking Iron Head against the team. Now, it still does not fix the problems. I would say originally this team was probably a 5 out of 10, given all these problems. After these changes, I would say maybe a 6.5 out of 10. In my opinion, the best way to fix this team, what would really improve it, is replacing this Tornadus for something else. I know it was the central Pokemon of the team, so I'm not going to replace it, but I really found it terrible to use, not a strong breaker, can't really pivot into anything, super easy to switch into, and unreliable. I don't think this is a Pokemon worth using. I could see maybe you could justify a Nasty Plot set, probably not on this team, but realistically replacing this with like a Corviknight or a Zapdos would make this team stronger. And also give the team a real steel resist. So I would highly recommend, if you're going to really try to make this team viable, removing Tornadus. I just don't think Specs Tornadus has a place in OU. Maybe on rain teams, clicking Specs Hurricane. Not only is that stronger, but it's more reliable. But out of rain, just clicking an 80% accurate move that's not really that strong and has a ton of resists, not really an exciting idea to me. Alright, well I hope you guys enjoyed. As always, the original and fixed versions will be in the description, and I will be doing this again sometime, so just watch out for the announcement. Maybe your team will be featured next time. Hope you guys had a good time, and I'll see you next time.